Leo stood in the thin grey light of the chapel, the scent of wilting lilies and cheap polish thick in his throat. His father was gone. The thought was a simple, brutal fact, a stone in his gut. He stared at the plain pine box, the best he could afford, and felt a hollowness that echoed the empty space beside him where his wife, Isabel, should have been offering comfort. Instead, she stood a few feet away, a statue of pure disdain carved from ice. Her black dress was couture, a slash of midnight against the chapel's faded pastels. Her expression was one of profound boredom, as if she were enduring a dreadfully long and tasteless play. Beside her, her brother Richard shifted his weight, checking the gold watch on his wrist. It was a gesture of theatrical impatience, a silent statement that this entire affair, this inconvenient spectacle of lower-class grief, was beneath them. Leo's own suit was 10 years old, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. It was the suit he'd been married in. The irony was a bitter pill he had long grown accustomed to swallowing. The service ended. A few of his father's old friends from the workshop offered quiet, calloused hands and sincere condolences. They were good men, men who understood the quiet dignity of a life spent creating, of working with one's hands. They were a world away from the life Isabel had dragged him into. As the last of the mourners drifted away, Isabel finally moved. She glided towards him, her heels clicking on the linoleum with sharp, accusatory taps. "Well, that was rustic," she said, her voice a low, cutting whisper that carried like a shout in the silent room. "Honestly, Leo, a pine box. It's what they bury paupers in." Leo's jaw tightened. "It was what he would have wanted, Izzy. He wasn't a man for fuss." "He wasn't a man for ambition, you mean?" Richard chimed in, stepping up beside his sister. He smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. Like father, like son. Isabel's eyes swept over Leo's worn suit, her gaze lingering on a frayed cuff. A look of genuine disgust crossed her face. "You couldn't even rent a decent suit for your own father's funeral. You are an embarrassment, Leo, a constant, unending embarrassment." She reached into her designer handbag, her movements sharp and angry. She pulled out a small wad of cash, 3 $100 bills, and held them out. When Leo didn't take them, she didn't place them in his hand. She threw them at his chest. The bills fluttered to the floor, landing near the toe of his scuffed shoe. "Here," she spat, the word dripping with venom. "Go buy yourself some dignity. God knows you can't afford it on your own." The public humiliation was a physical blow. It was sharp and cold, stealing the air from his lungs. The chapel, which had felt sacred moments before, now felt like a stage for his shame. He looked from her cold, beautiful face to the money on the floor, and something inside him, something that had been slowly cracking for years, finally shattered. He didn't bend to pick up the money. He couldn't. He just stood there, frozen, as she and Richard turned and walked away, their laughter echoing faintly in the cavernous room. He was alone with the pine box and the scent of dying flowers. His gaze fell to his wrist. Tucked under his frayed cuff was his father's watch. It was an old, battered thing with a scratched crystal and a worn leather strap. His father had given it to him just a week ago, his hand trembling with weakness in the sterile hospital room. "This saw me through everything, son," he had whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "It's more than it looks. Never forget that." Leo touched the cool metal, the only solid thing in his swirling world of grief and shame. It was a link to a better man, a simpler time. He didn't know it then, but in that moment of profound weakness, he was holding the key to his own salvation. It was a mystery seed planted in the barren soil of his despair. The life Leo shared with Isabel had not always been a landscape of quiet desperation. He remembered the beginning, a time that now felt like a story about someone else. He had been a young carpenter, proud of his craft, with hands that could turn raw timber into things of beauty and function. He had his own small workshop, a modest inheritance from his grandfather, and a future that seemed solid and true. He met Isabel at a local gallery opening. She was incandescent, a creature of light and laughter who seemed impossibly drawn to his quiet nature. She spoke of art and ambition, of a world far grander than the one he knew. He was captivated. Her family, the Devereux, owned a boutique luxury goods business. They presented a facade of old money and effortless success. In reality, Leo would later learn, their company was a house of cards, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. When they were engaged, Isabel had come to him with tears in her eyes. The family business was facing a temporary cash flow problem. A crucial loan was about to be called in. They were going to lose everything, she'd sobbed, the family home, the company, their legacy. Blinded by love and the desperate need to be her hero, Leo had done the unthinkable. He had sold his grandfather's workshop, the very heart of his identity, and poured every last cent of his life savings into the Devereux enterprise. It was a staggering sum for him, a fortune built over 3 generations of hard work. To them it was a temporary reprieve, a bandage. The gratitude was immediate and effusive, but it was also short-lived. Once the money was absorbed and the crisis averted, the dynamic shifted. He was no longer the savior, he was the help. His contribution was subtly reframed, not as a sacrifice, but as a crude investment from which he should expect no say. He became the quiet, handy husband who could fix a leaky faucet but was asked to remain silent when their wealthy friends came for dinner. He was the man who worked with his hands, a fact Isabel and Richard mentioned with a faint, apologetic smile, as if it were a charming but slightly embarrassing character flaw. For 10 years he endured it. He loved her, or at least he loved the memory of the woman he thought she was. He told himself the snide remarks, the casual cruelty, the way she flinched from his calloused hands were just quirks of her upbringing. He was the sturdy oak, and she was the delicate vine. He was meant to be strong and silent, but the vine had become a python, slowly squeezing the life out of him. The Devereux' worldview was simple and brutal. The world was divided into 2 groups, people like them, who were destined for greatness and deserved luxury, and people like Leo, who existed to serve and facilitate that greatness. They believed their name, their superficial charm, and their carefully curated social connections were assets of immense value. Leo's hard work, his honesty, his integrity, these were worthless currencies in their world. They saw his humility not as a virtue, but as a profound weakness, a confirmation of his inherent inferiority. Their business, propped up by his sacrifice, became a symbol of their own supposed genius. They took out more loans, living ever more lavishly, building their glittering facade on a foundation of his quiet, forgotten generosity. After the funeral, the python tightened its grip. The pretense of a marriage dissolved completely. Isabel's cruelty, once delivered in carefully veiled insults, became overt and relentless. "I've filed for divorce, Leo," she announced one evening, not even looking up from her phone. She was sitting in the opulent living room he had renovated with his own hands. He was stunned, but not surprised. "Isabel!" "Don't!" she cut him off. "This has been over for years. I've wasted enough of my life pretending. I'm taking the house, of course. My name is on the deed." "My money paid for this house," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "My work is in these walls." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were cold and dead. Your money? That pittance? That was a decade ago, Leo. Consider it a fee for the privilege of being associated with the Devereux name. You are getting nothing. The divorce proceedings were a brutal confirmation of her words. Her lawyers painted him as an incompetent, unambitious man who had leeched off his wife's family for years. They twisted his sacrifice into an act of pathetic dependency. The courts, swayed by the Devereux's expensive legal team and their carefully constructed lies, sided with her. He was to vacate the house within 30 days. His assets were frozen. He was left with his truck, his tools, and a few boxes of personal belongings. On the last day, as he was packing the final box, Isabel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him. Her new lover, a slick real estate developer with predatory eyes, was leaning against the wall behind her. "Don't forget this," she said, a malicious smile playing on her lips. She picked up his father's watch from the nightstand where he'd left it and tossed it into the box of his clothes. "You can have your broken old watch. It suits you, worthless and stuck in the past." The words were meant to be the final twist of the knife, and they were. He closed the box, the sound of the tape sealing it shut, feeling like the end of everything. He carried his meager possessions out to his truck, not once looking back at the woman who had systematically dismantled his life. Driving away, the weight of his failure pressed down on him. He had nothing. He was staying in a cheap motel, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and the lingering smell of stale smoke. Despondent, he sat on the edge of the lumpy bed and unpacked his box of clothes. His father's watch lay on top of a folded shirt. He picked it up. The crystal was hazed with 1,000 tiny scratches. The leather strap was cracked and faded. It didn't even tick. Isabel was right. It was broken. But then he remembered his father's voice. Weak, but certain. "It's more than it looks. He had no money. He had no hope. He had nothing left to lose." Clinging to that last thread of his father's memory, a desperate, foolish idea began to form. Maybe it wasn't about monetary value. Maybe it was about finding some other kind of worth, some meaning in the wreckage. He decided to get it appraised, not because he expected it to be worth anything, but because he needed to do something, anything that connected him to the man his father was, not the man Isabel had made him feel he was. It was a small act of defiance, a quiet search for a truth he didn't even know existed. Finding the right person was the first challenge. Leo didn't want a jewelry store clerk who would glance at the battered timepiece and offer him $20 for scrap. He needed an expert, a true craftsman. He remembered an old friend of his father's, a retired clockmaker named Arthur, who lived in a neighboring town. He found Arthur in a dusty, cluttered workshop that smelled of oil and old wood, a scent that felt like coming home. Arthur was a small man with kind eyes magnified by thick spectacles. He listened patiently as Leo explained his situation, his voice faltering as he recounted Isabel's final, cruel words. Arthur took the watch, his touch gentle and reverent. He examined it under a bright lamp, turning it over and over. He didn't say anything for a long time. "Your father was a good man, Leo," he finally said, his voice soft. This is beyond my expertise, but I know who you should see. There's a man in the city, Mr. Harrison. He's not just an appraiser. He's a historian of timepieces. If anyone can tell you the story of this watch, it's him." Arthur wrote down an address on a small, crisp card. "Don't call first, just go, show him this watch." The journey to the city felt like a pilgrimage. Mr. Harrison's office was located in a stately old building of granite and marble. The brass plaque on the door simply read, "Harrison Horological Services." It was intimidating. Leo, in his work jeans and a clean shirt, felt deeply out of place. He pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped into a room that was less an office and more a private museum. The air was still and cool. Glass cases displayed intricate, beautiful timepieces from centuries past. A tall, impeccably dressed man with silver hair and a calm, intelligent face looked up from a large desk. "May I help you?" he asked, his voice measured and polite. "Mr. Harrison, my name is Leo. Arthur sent me," Leo said, his own voice sounding rough and loud in the quiet space. He carefully unwrapped the watch from a soft cloth and placed it on the polished mahogany desk. Mr. Harrison's expression was professionally neutral as he picked up the watch. He fitted a loop to his eye and began his examination. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt foolish. This was a waste of time. The man was going to laugh him out of the building. But he didn't laugh. Instead, a strange stillness came over him. His breathing seemed to stop. He slowly lowered the loop from his eye and stared at the watch, then at Leo. His professional mask had slipped, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. "Where?" Mr. Harrison said, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you get this?" "It was my father's," Leo replied, his throat dry. "He gave it to me before he passed." Without another word, Mr. Harrison stood up and carried the watch as if it were a holy relic into a back room. Leo was left alone with the ticking clock, his anxiety mounting with every second that passed. He heard faint, muffled sounds from the other room, the click of tools, a soft exclamation. 10 minutes felt like an eternity. When Mr. Harrison returned, his face was pale and his hands were trembling slightly. He had placed the watch on a velvet tray. His demeanor was completely transformed. The polite appraiser was gone, replaced by a man who looked as if he had just seen a ghost. "Mr. K, please sit down," he said, gesturing to a leather chair opposite his desk. Leo sat, his legs suddenly weak. Mr. Harrison took a deep breath. "This is not just a watch," he began, his voice filled with awe. "This is the journeyman's piece. It was crafted in 1952 by Henri Dubois, arguably the greatest independent watchmaker of the 20th century. It was his personal prototype for a new escapement mechanism. It was revolutionary. He only ever made one." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It was believed to have been lost in a fire at his workshop 60 years ago. The entire horological world has considered it the holy grail of lost timepieces. Its existence has been a legend, a myth." Leo stared at the battered object on the velvet tray. It seemed impossible. "But it's so plain. It's broken." "It's not broken," Mr. Harrison said, a smile finally touching his lips. "The crown is designed to disengage the movement. It's a security feature." And the distressed look, the scratches, the worn case, that was all done intentionally by Dubois himself. He was a deeply private man. He wanted to wear his masterpiece without attracting attention. It's a work of genius, hidden inside a shell of humility. Leo felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. He thought of his father, a simple carpenter. How could he have owned something like this? "My grandfather?" Leo murmured, a distant memory surfacing. "He served in the war. He saved a man's life in France. A watchmaker, I think." Mr. Harrison's eyes widened further. "Henri Dubois. He was captured and was being transported when his convoy was attacked. An Allied soldier pulled him from the wreckage. Dubois swore he owed that man his life. He must have given your grandfather this watch as a gift of gratitude, a gift of one master craftsman to another." The story clicked into place, a perfect, astonishing mechanism, just like the watch itself. A legacy of honor and skill passed down through generations, disguised as a worthless trinket. "Mr. Harrison," Leo asked, his voice trembling now. What is it worth? Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Leo's. At auction, to the right collectors, this watch would not sell for thousands. It would sell for millions. Leo's mind went blank. The word didn't compute. Based on recent sales of other unique pieces and the legendary status of this one, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice steady and sure, I would give a conservative auction estimate of $4 million. It could, quite possibly, go for much more. My initial honest appraisal values this piece at approximately $4.7 million. $4.7 million. The number hung in the air, vast and incomprehensible. Leo stared at the watch. The thing Isabel had tossed into his box like garbage, the symbol of his worthlessness. In the midst of this revelation, another piece of the puzzle was falling into place, one that Leo was not yet aware of. Mr. Harrison, being a discreet man of the world, also offered estate services and had connections to some of the city's sharpest legal minds. As he began the process of authenticating the watch, he advised Leo to get his affairs in order. He referred Leo to a lawyer, a shrewd and tenacious man named Mr. Davies, to review the divorce settlement. Mr. Davies was a bulldog, a man who delighted in digging through the financial refuse of the arrogant and wealthy. A few days later, while the watch was being authenticated under high security, Mr. Davies called Leo into his office. He had a stack of financial documents on his desk. Your ex-wife and her brother are not just arrogant, Leo, Mr. Davies said, his tone grimly satisfied. They are fools. They've been running their company on fumes and massive loans for years. He slid a document across the desk. This is the big one. 6 months ago, they took out a final massive loan to fund a lavish new showroom. They leveraged everything they had, the business, the inventory, and the family home. Leo frowned. But the home was paid off. My money did that. Exactly, Mr. Davies said, with a predatory grin. Your initial investment gave them the collateral they needed to hang themselves. Without the capital you provided 10 years ago, no bank would have ever given them this loan. Their entire glittering empire, their social standing, everything is built on the foundation of the money they despised you for providing. The irony was staggering. It was a perfect closed loop of deceit and dependency. They had taken his sacrifice, used it to build their pedestal, and were now standing on it as it crumbled beneath their feet. They were completely, utterly, and unknowingly dependent on the man they had thrown away. Leo sat in Mr. Davies's leather chair, the two streams of information converging in his mind like a tidal wave. The watch, a symbol of his family's hidden honor, was worth millions. And the family who had humiliated him was balanced on a knife's edge, their entire existence propped up by his past generosity. The grief and shame that had clouded his mind for so long began to recede. In its place, a cold, clear light was dawning. He thought of Isabel throwing the money at him in the chapel. He thought of her tossing the watch into his box, worthless and stuck in the past. Something inside him clicked. It wasn't a loud snap, but a quiet, definitive shift. The patient victim, the man who had absorbed a decade of cruelty, was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone who understood the intricate mechanics of both timepieces and justice. The watch wasn't just money, it was power. It was a weapon. And he finally understood how to use it. This was no longer about survival, it was about retribution. Mr. Harrison, Leo said over the phone later that day, his voice devoid of any of its previous hesitation. It was calm, steady, and cold. I want to consign the watch for auction, the biggest one you can find. Of course, Mr. Harrison replied, sensing the change in Leo's tone. I will make the arrangements with the finest house in Geneva. And Mr. Davies, Leo said in the next call, I want you to set up a holding company. Something discreet and anonymous. We're going to buy a bank loan. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low chuckle of appreciation. Leo, Mr. Davies said, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. The decision was made. The gears of a meticulous and devastating plan began to turn. Leo sat in his motel room, his father's watch now locked securely in a vault, and felt a profound sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer a carpenter simply building with wood. He was an architect, designing the careful and complete demolition of the House of Devereux. The strategy session took place in Mr. Davies's soundproofed boardroom, a space of dark wood and quiet menace. It was just the three of them. Leo, the quiet eye of the storm, Mr. Harrison, the dignified expert providing the capital, and Mr. Davies, the gleeful tactician. The plan is a two-pronged attack, Davies explained, pacing in front of a whiteboard. Phase 1 is public. Phase 2 is silent. They won't see the connection until it's far too late. He scrawled on the board. Phase 1, the auction. Mr. Harrison, you've already set this in motion. The key is the narrative. We leak the story of the lost Dubois, a tale of war heroes, genius craftsmen, and a hidden legacy.
We want the entire luxury world, Isabel's world, buzzing about this watch. We want them to feel envy, to see it as the ultimate status symbol they can never possess. Mr. Harrison nodded. My contacts in the press are already preparing the articles. The provenance is ironclad. The story is irresistible. Good, Davies continued, turning back to the board. Phase 2, the acquisition. While they are distracted by the glittering prize, we move in the shadows. I've already opened negotiations with the bank that holds their debt. They're a large, impersonal institution. Devereux Luxury is a non-performing loan on their books, a risk they'd be happy to offload for a slight discount. We'll use the auction house's advance to secure the purchase, Leo said, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet, but held an undeniable authority. The other two men looked at him with a new respect. The transformation was remarkable.
Precisely, Davies affirmed with a sharp smile. We create a shell corporation, Argent Capital, untraceable, anonymous. Argent Capital will purchase the entirety of their $7 million debt. The moment that transaction is complete, we, Leo, become the bank. We own them. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. It was surgical. It didn't use threats or violence. It used the very systems of finance and law that the Devereux worshipped. It turned their own ambition and arrogance into the weapon of their destruction. They would be ruined not by an enemy they could see, but by the cold, impartial logic of a balance sheet. The initiation of the plan was swift. Mr. Harrison made a call to a trusted journalist at a major financial paper. Within days, the first article appeared online, The Journeyman's Secret, Lost Horological Masterpiece to Shatter Auction Records. The story was a sensation. It detailed the watch's incredible history, the tale of Henri Dubois and the unknown soldier who saved his life. It was accompanied by high-resolution photographs of the timepiece, its humble exterior belying the genius within. The article went viral among the wealthy elite. In their marble and glass showroom, Richard Devereux scrolled through the article on his tablet, his eyes wide with avarice. "Izzy, look at this," he said, shoving the tablet in front of his sister. "Can you imagine owning something like that? The prestige. We'd be legends." Isabel glanced at the picture of the watch. For a fleeting, microscopic second, a flicker of recognition crossed her mind. The scratched face, the worn strap. It looked vaguely familiar, like a discarded piece of junk from her past. But the thought was gone as quickly as it came, dismissed as impossible. "We need to be at that auction, Richard," she said, her mind already racing. The people there were the contacts we could make. This could be the lifeline we need. They were blissfully unaware that the watch in the article was the same one she had tossed into a cardboard box just weeks before. While they were dreaming of rubbing shoulders with billionaires, Mr. Davies was closing his deal. The bank, eager to clear a risky loan from its portfolio before the end of the quarter, agreed to sell the Devereux debt to Argent Capital for 95 cents on the dollar. The paperwork was signed. The funds advanced by the auction house against the watch's guaranteed minimum were transferred. It was done. Leo was now the master of their fate. The first domino was a single, cream-coloured envelope. It arrived at the Devereux showroom by courier, addressed to Isabel and Richard. It looked official, important. Inside was a letter, brief and devoid of emotion. It informed them that their outstanding business loan, number 74B, had been acquired in its entirety by a private investment firm, Argent Capital. All future correspondence and payments were to be directed to a new address, a post office box in a different state. Richard read it first, a frown creasing his brow. "What the hell is Argent Capital? I've never heard of them." "It's probably nothing," Isabel said, waving a dismissive hand. "Banks sell loans all the time. It's just paperwork. As long as we make the minimum payments, who cares who holds the note?" Her arrogance was a fortress, impenetrable to the subtle warnings of impending doom. They were so convinced of their own importance that they couldn't conceive of a world where they weren't in control. They saw the letter not as a threat, but as an administrative annoyance. They were wrong. 2 days later, a second envelope arrived. This one was from Argent Capital's legal department. The letter was even shorter than the first. It stated that upon review of their financial performance and multiple breaches of the loan covenants, Argent Capital was exercising its right to call the entire $7 million loan due. Payment in full was expected within 30 business days. This time they couldn't dismiss it. The words on the page were stark and terrifying. Payment in full. 30 days. Disbelief was the first reaction. "This is a mistake," Richard stammered, his face losing its colour. "They can't do this. It's predatory. It's illegal." Isabel grabbed the phone, her hands shaking with rage. "I'll sort this out. I'll call our lawyer. I'll call the bank. Someone will pay for this harassment." But their lawyer gave them grim news. The clause was standard. Argent Capital was fully within its legal rights. The old bank had been lenient, allowing them to slide on late payments and poor performance. Their new creditor was not. Frantic attempts at damage control began. They tried to contact Argent Capital, but were met with a wall of corporate silence. Their calls were routed to an automated system. Their emails received polite, unhelpful, auto-generated replies. There was no one to negotiate with, no one to charm, no one to threaten. Panic set in. They tried to secure a new loan to cover the old one, but news of their instability had already begun to leak. No financial institution would touch them. Their credit lines, once seemingly limitless, were suddenly frozen. The cascade effect had begun. A key supplier, hearing rumors of their financial trouble, demanded upfront payment for a large shipment of Italian leather. They couldn't pay. The order was cancelled, leaving their workshop idle and their biggest clients furious. Words spread through the city's elite circles like a virus. The Devereux were in trouble. Invitations to exclusive parties dried up. Friends who had once laughed at their jokes now avoided their calls. Their social standing, the currency they valued above all else, was becoming worthless. Isabel's carefully curated social media presence became a testament to her spiraling desperation. The posts of extravagant dinners and new acquisitions stopped. They were replaced by vague, passive-aggressive comments about loyalty and fair-weather friends, followed by desperate, smiling photos that seemed manic and hollow. From his new, modest but clean apartment, Leo watched the collapse. Mr. Davies provided him with daily updates. He read the panicked articles in the business section. He saw Isabel's frantic online posts. He felt no joy. He felt no pity. What he felt was a profound, cold calm. It was the feeling of a complex machine operating exactly as it was designed. It was the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman watching a perfectly cut joint slide into place. He had built this, and it was strong and true. He maintained a facade of quiet sympathy when mutual acquaintances called. He feigned ignorance. "I heard they were having some trouble," he would say, his voice perfectly modulated. "It's a real shame. I wish them the best." The dramatic irony was exquisite. They had cast him out, believing him to be nothing, while they postured as titans of industry. Now their entire world was being dismantled by the very man they had discarded, and they were completely, utterly oblivious. He was the ghost in their machine, the anonymous force they couldn't fight because they couldn't even see him. The final act was set for the night of the auction in Geneva. The auction hall was a cathedral of wealth, filled with a hushed reverence for money and beauty. The air shimmered with diamonds and the scent of expensive perfume. Billionaires, oligarchs, and celebrity collectors sat in plush velvet chairs, their faces impassive poker masks. Isabel and Richard were there. They had pulled every string, called in every last favor to secure tickets. They looked haggard and desperate, their expensive clothes hanging on them like costumes for a role they could no longer play. They weren't there to bid, they were there to hunt, to find a wealthy savior in the crowd, someone to rescue them from the abyss. Leo was also there, but not in the main hall. He sat in a private viewing room reserved for clients of the highest importance, watching the proceedings on a closed-circuit monitor. Beside him, Mr. Harrison sat, a small, satisfied smile on his face. The early lots came and went, paintings, jewels, vintage cars, each selling for astronomical sums. Then the room fell silent. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice boomed, "Lot 307, the lost masterpiece, the Henri Dubois journeyman's piece." A reverent hush fell over the crowd as the watch was brought out on a velvet cushion and displayed on the rotating pedestal. The high-definition monitor in Leo's room showed it in stunning detail, the intentionally scratched crystal, the worn steel case, the humble leather strap. Down in the hall, Isabel stared at the image on the large screens, a strange feeling of unease prickling her skin. The bidding started at €1,000,000. It was a swift, brutal battle. Paddles shot up across the room. The price leaped, climbing past 2 million, then 3, in a matter of seconds. The auctioneer's voice was a hypnotic chant, marking the ascent into legendary territory. 3.5 million! Do I hear 4 million from the gentleman on the phone? Richard was sweating, his eyes darting around the room as if he could physically absorb some of the wealth. Isabel was transfixed, her mind unable to process the numbers. Finally, after a tense back and forth between two anonymous phone bidders, the gavel came down. Sold! For €4,200,000. Converted, it was just over $4.7 million. The room erupted in polite yet stunned applause. A new world record for a Dubois timepiece, the auctioneer announced, beaming. The seller, who wishes to remain anonymous, has asked me to read a brief statement on their behalf. A staff member handed him a card. The auctioneer cleared his throat and read. This watch was a gift, passed from one craftsman to another, a symbol of honor and integrity. It was later discarded, deemed worthless by those who only see value in what glitters. Its sale tonight will fund a new foundation for young artisans to ensure that true craftsmanship, humility, and hard work are valued once more. The statement was elegant, moralistic, and to most in the room, simply a nice closing sentiment. But for Isabel, the words discarded and deemed worthless struck a dissonant chord. The image of the watch, the story, the phrase, it all coalesced in her mind with the force of a thunderclap. Her memory flashed back to a cardboard box, to her own mocking voice. "You can have your broken old watch. It suits you, worthless and stuck in the past." Her face went white. It couldn't be. It was an impossible, insane coincidence. And then the auctioneer delivered the final, devastating line. "The seller has one final message, a personal one. It is for Isabel and Richard Devereux, who I believe are in the audience tonight." A spotlight, as if guided by the hand of God, swung through the darkened room and landed squarely on their table. Hundreds of heads turned. They were trapped, exposed. The auctioneer looked down at the card and read the final sentence. It reads, "You should have picked up the money I left on the chapel floor. Regards, Argent Capital." The name. Argent Capital, the anonymous firm that had destroyed their lives, the funeral, the money, the watch. It all connected in a single, blinding, horrifying moment of revelation. Leo. It had all been Leo. From his private room, Leo watched Isabel's face on the monitor. He saw the flicker of confusion, the dawning horror, and the final, complete implosion of her carefully constructed world. A sound escaped her lips, a strangled gasp that turned into a raw, animalistic shriek of fury and disbelief. "No! No!" She shot to her feet, her chair crashing to the floor. "He stole it! That was my watch! It was ours! He's a thief! A monster!" Her breakdown was total and spectacular. Her mask of sophisticated composure shattered, revealing the ugly, grasping greed beneath. She clawed at her brother's arm, her voice rising to a hysterical screech. "Do something, Richard! He lied to us! The little carpenter lied to us all!" Richard sat frozen, his face ashen, a statue of pure shock. The crowd stared, first in confusion, then in dawning comprehension and contempt. They were witnessing the social execution of the Devereux name. Security guards moved in swiftly and professionally. They took Isabel by the arms. She struggled, still screaming, her words a torrent of accusations and curses that only served to seal her fate. She was a madwoman, publicly unraveling in the world's most exclusive venue. As they were unceremoniously escorted out of the grand hall, their exit followed by a wave of derisive whispers, Leo stood up from his chair in the quiet viewing room. He felt nothing but a vast, empty peace. The fire of his anger had burned itself out, leaving behind not ash, but clean, solid ground. Mr. Harrison looked at him, his eyes filled with a deep, paternal respect. "It is done." Leo nodded. He turned away from the monitor, showing the chaos below, and walked out of the room, not looking back. He left their ruin behind him, a mess of their own making, finally and irrevocably cleaned up. Justice, like a fine timepiece, had been perfectly calibrated and allowed to run its course. The epilogue of the Devereux was written not in the society pages, but in the dry, unforgiving text of court filings. Their bankruptcy was absolute. The foreclosure was executed by Argent Capital, and the family home, the opulent showroom, and all remaining assets were liquidated to cover a fraction of their debt. The Devereux luxury brand ceased to exist. Worse was to come. In the course of the bankruptcy proceedings, Mr. Davies's forensic accountants uncovered evidence of widespread fraud. Isabel and Richard had falsified documents and lied about their company's value to secure their final, fatal loan. Criminal charges were filed, faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, they both pleaded guilty. Richard received a sentence of 18 months in a low-security prison. Isabel, as the mastermind of the scheme, was sentenced to 3 years. Her tearful, self-pitying plea for leniency in the courtroom was met with a cold, unimpressed stare from the judge. They lost everything: their wealth, their freedom, and the one thing they truly worshipped, their status. Upon their release, they would be social pariahs, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. They were forced to live in a cramped, run-down apartment on the far side of town, a world away from the life of glamour they felt was their birthright. The fall was not just financial, it was biblical. Leo, in contrast, did not embrace the life of a multimillionaire. The money for him was never the prize. It was the means to an end. It was the tool he had used to restore a moral balance to his universe. He used a significant portion of the funds to establish the David Rinaldi Foundation for Artisans, named in honor of his father. Its mission was to provide scholarships and apprenticeships for young people who wanted to learn skilled trades: carpentry, masonry, metalworking, and yes, even watchmaking. He wanted to build a legacy his father would have been proud of, one based on the enduring value of creating something real and lasting with one's own hands. He bought a modest house with a large workshop out in the country, far from the city and its ghosts. He lived simply, finding contentment not in spending his fortune, but in the familiar ritual of his craft, the scent of sawdust, the heft of a good tool, the satisfaction of a perfect dovetail joint. One afternoon, a woman came into his workshop. She was looking to commission some custom frames for a new exhibition. Her name was Clara, and she owned a small but respected art gallery in a nearby town. She had been sent by a mutual friend who had praised Leo's unparalleled skill. She had kind eyes and a warm, genuine smile. She didn't talk about money or status. She talked about the grain of the wood, the beauty of the form, the passion of the artist. She looked at his calloused hands, not with disgust, but with admiration. Their first conversation lasted for hours. It was the beginning of something new, something built not on illusion and ambition, but on shared values and mutual respect. For the first time in over a decade, Leo felt seen for who he truly was. She was his moral reward, a symbol of a healthy, happy future he had earned. The final scene of his old life was replaced by a new one. He was in his sun-drenched workshop, a young apprentice beside him, explaining the fine art of wood bending. Clara was there, sketching in a notepad, a comfortable, happy silence between them. The air was filled with the promise of a peaceful, purposeful life. He sometimes looked at the high-resolution photo of his father's watch that he kept on his desk. He had never seen it again after the auction. Its journey was over. It had done its work. Leo finally understood the full meaning of his father's last words. The watch was indeed more than it looked. Its true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or auction records. Its value was in the lessons it held, that true worth is often hidden beneath a humble surface, that integrity is a currency that never devalues, and that in the end, justice, like time itself, is patient, precise, and inescapable.